When I was 8, I had had 2 glasses of champagne, and boom, I was like tipsy and,
What's wrong, Amy?
I've never done this before. Why me?
Oh, you'll be terrific.
But millions of people will be watching.
Don't worry, we're rooting for you. Listen, it's fun to bust snap, crackle, pop into your morning.
My very own cheering section.
Like we said, you'll be terrific.
I wanted to be like them so badly for so long. That was like, God, I want to be just...
Hollywood thrives on stories of reinvention, on stars who fall from grace and rise again, but behind the glitter, its brightest lights often hide the deepest scars. Drew Barrymore is living proof of this cruel paradox. Born into the most famous acting dynasty in America, she was destined to be a star before she could even speak. At only 7 years old, she became the heart of E.T., the Extra-Terrestrial, a child whose smile and tears made millions believe in magic again. For a brief moment, Drew embodied everything Hollywood promised: innocence, wonder, and a future filled with endless possibilities. But innocence does not last in a world built on excess. By the age of 9, she was sipping champagne at nightclubs. By 10, marijuana had entered her world. By 12, she was using cocaine. By 13, she was addicted. By 14, she was in rehab. And by 15, she was legally separated from the very mother who had introduced her to the spotlight. Her childhood had been sold for box office gold. Yet somehow, Drew refused to vanish. Through scandal and survival, she rebuilt herself: actress, producer, businesswoman, mother, talk show host. Each chapter of her life has been a cycle of destruction and rebirth, tragedy and resilience. But what is the true cost of survival? Did Hollywood destroy her, or did it forge her into something stronger? Is Drew Barrymore's story one of triumph or of tragedy that never stopped unfolding? This is the heartbreaking journey of Drew Barrymore at 50. Early life and childhood. Drew Barrymore was born on the 22nd of February, 1975, in Culver City, California. From her very first breath, she carried both privilege and curse. Hers was not the childhood of an ordinary girl, it was the continuation of a dynasty whose triumphs and tragedies stretched across a century. The Barrymore family had long been regarded as Hollywood royalty. Her grandfather, John Barrymore, known as the Great Profile, was celebrated as one of the finest actors of his generation. His Shakespearean performances were legendary, his charisma unmatched. But his life was also a cautionary tale marked by scandal, financial ruin, and alcoholism. Her great-aunt, Ethel Barrymore, was a queen of Broadway. Her great-uncle Lionel, an Oscar-winning actor. The name Barrymore opened doors everywhere, but it also carried a prophecy: brilliance, often followed by destruction. Drew's father, John Drew Barrymore, inherited the family name but not its stability. Handsome, talented, and deeply troubled, he drifted in and out of roles, undone by addiction and unreliability. He was largely absent from Drew's life, a shadow she would forever long for but rarely see. Her mother, Jaid, a struggling actress of Hungarian descent, was determined to keep one foot inside Hollywood. Yet instead of offering her daughter shelter from its dangers, she ushered Drew into them. By the time Drew was 11 months old, she had appeared in a commercial for dog food. At 3, she acted in Ken Russell's science fiction film Altered States. At 5, she was auditioning for roles that would place her in front of millions. Childhood for Drew was never a sanctuary, it was a stage. Her earliest memories were of bright lights and crowded rooms, of strangers praising her for being charming, of adults treating her like a commodity. Drew was naturally vivacious. Her lopsided grin and mischievous humor could win anyone over. Casting directors adored her, agents praised her, producers saw dollar signs. But all of this attention came at the cost of a childhood, lived in safety and quiet. At home, things were unstable. Her parents' relationship was fractured. John Drew Barrymore was unreliable and often absent. Jade took Drew with her to auditions, to parties, to gatherings where deals were struck and reputations built. A little girl, barely old enough for kindergarten, was already breathing the air of Hollywood's adult world. When Drew was 6, her life changed forever. Steven Spielberg, already one of the most powerful directors in Hollywood, was casting for his new film about a lonely boy and a stranded alien. Drew auditioned for the part of Gertie, the younger sister. In the room, she spun a story about being the drummer in a punk rock band. Spielberg laughed, charmed by her wild imagination. He saw immediately that she wasn't just acting, she was living truth on command. He gave her the part. The release of E.T., the Extra-Terrestrial in 1982 transformed Drew Barrymore from a promising child actress into a global icon. At only 7 years old, she became the face of innocence. Her laughter was contagious, her tears heartbreaking. She was the emotional anchor of a film that earned nearly $800 million and became one of the most beloved stories of all time. Overnight, Drew Barrymore was a household name. But fame is a double-edged sword. With recognition came exposure. Reporters clamored for interviews, photographers followed her everywhere, and late-night hosts invited her onto their stages. Instead of playgrounds, Drew's world was now television studios and Hollywood parties. Instead of a bedtime story, she was reading scripts. Her mother encouraged her to attend adult events, bringing her into nightclubs like Studio 54. At an age when most children were playing hopscotch, Drew was learning how to charm record executives and film producers. Alcohol was handed to her like soda. Cigarettes were offered as though they were candy. Applause greeted her presence, and no one asked whether she belonged there. Drew once described her early life as a roller coaster that never stopped. There were highs, birthday parties on film sets, gifts from directors, the thrill of fans asking for her autograph. But there were also lows. Long days when her father never came home, nights when her mother disappeared into Hollywood's social scene, moments of loneliness when she realized no one was looking out for her. The Barrymore name was both a blessing and a curse. It guaranteed her opportunities other children could never dream of, but it also tied her to a family history of collapse. Drew could not escape the shadow of her grandfather, the brilliance of her relatives, the addiction that ran like blood through their veins. The dynasty gave her a crown, but it was heavy, too heavy for a little girl to wear. As childhood slipped away, Drew began to feel the cracks in her carefully built world. She had everything most children would envy: fame, money, adoration, yet she lacked the one thing every child deserves: protection. Hollywood saw her as a star, not as a girl. The adults in her life saw her as a means, not as a daughter. By the time she entered her preteen years, the seeds of rebellion were already sown. The girl who had made the world laugh with E.T. was also the girl learning to numb her loneliness with substances she should never have known. She was adored by millions, but she belonged to no one, not even to herself. Her early life was both dazzling and devastating, the opening act of a tragedy that would unfold under the harshest spotlight imaginable. Drew Barrymore had become the heart of a beloved film, but behind her bright eyes was already the shadow of a future that would nearly destroy her. Early career. Drew Barrymore's early career was both a miracle and a warning. Most actors spend years chasing their first role, enduring rejection after rejection. Drew, however, was barely old enough to tie her own shoes when Hollywood claimed her as its newest star. Her official film debut came in 1980 with a small role in Ken Russell's Altered States. At only 5 years old, Drew already displayed a natural ease before the camera. She did not seem intimidated by the massive lights, the crowded crew, or the strange demands of filmmaking. She was too young to understand pressure, and that innocence gave her a freedom many adult actors envied. But Altered States was just the beginning. 2 years later, her life changed with E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial. Playing the role of Gertie, Drew stole every scene she entered. Her wide-eyed wonder, her mischievous humor, her ability to cry with genuine heartbreak, none of it seemed rehearsed. Audiences believed her because she was not pretending. She was simply being Drew. The success of E.T. was staggering. It became one of the highest-grossing films of all time, earning nearly $800 million at the global box office. For Spielberg, it was confirmation of his genius. For Drew, it was both a coronation and a curse. At just 7 years old, she had become a global icon. Her face was on magazine covers, her interviews aired on primetime television, and her presence was requested at every Hollywood gathering. Opportunities poured in. By the age of 9, she starred in Firestarter, adapted from Stephen King's novel. The role was darker, more complex. A little girl named Charlie with terrifying pyrokinetic powers, hunted by ruthless government agents. The image of Drew unleashing fire from her small hands was haunting, not only as a performance but as a metaphor for her own life. An innocent child turned into a weapon by forces beyond her control. Critics marveled at her ability to carry the film, praising her intensity and emotional range. The following year, she appeared in Irreconcilable Differences, 1984, a satirical drama about a young girl suing her self-absorbed parents for divorce. The role struck eerily close to Drew's own reality. Her father was absent, her mother unreliable, and her longing for stability was palpable. For this performance, Drew earned a Golden Globe nomination. At just 9 years old, she had achieved a recognition most actors only dream of after decades of work. By now, Drew was more than a child star, she was a brand. Studios knew her name, guaranteed attention, and directors praised her instincts. Yet behind the applause, her world was spiraling. Hollywood adored her, but it did not protect her. Her mother, Jade, thrust her deeper into adult environments. Drew was escorted to premieres, parties, and nightclubs. At Studio 54, the legendary Manhattan club synonymous with excess, Drew was treated not as a child but as a celebrity guest. Bartenders poured her drinks, adults offered her cigarettes, and she was surrounded by a nightlife far removed from anything resembling childhood. By the time she was 9, Drew had tasted alcohol. By 10, she was smoking marijuana. By 12, cocaine entered her life. Each new substance blurred the line between child and adult even further. What should have been afternoons spent in classrooms were instead nights spent in clubs where no one told her no. The press began to notice. Tabloids ran stories about the wild child of Hollywood, delighting in the spectacle of a star who was barely a teenager yet already on a path of self-destruction. To the public, it was a scandal. To Drew, it was survival. Substances dulled the loneliness of being treated as a commodity rather than a daughter. Still, Drew's career marched on. She appeared in Cat's Eye, 1985, another Stephen King adaptation, again playing a child caught in terrifying situations. Audiences continued to be mesmerized by her, though some critics began to wonder if Hollywood was asking too much of her too soon. Her performances during these years revealed a truth few wanted to admit. Drew was not simply acting out fictional struggles, she was channeling her own. Every role that required fear, abandonment, or rage came easily to her because these emotions were her daily reality. Yet, as she approached adolescence, the golden shine began to fade. Casting directors still saw her as the adorable little girl from E.T., not the young teenager she was becoming. Studios hesitated to cast her in more mature roles, uncertain of how audiences would respond. Drew found herself caught between two identities, too old to play the innocent child, too young to be taken seriously as an adult actress. This in-between stage was dangerous. Hollywood is notoriously unforgiving to those who cannot fit its narrow mold. Drew, once the industry's darling, was now drifting. The work slowed. The phone calls came less often. Her reputation as a troubled child, fueled by rumors of addiction, and her public appearances at nightclubs spread quickly. By 13, Drew's name was associated less with talent and more with scandal. The girl who had once been America's sweetheart was now viewed as a cautionary tale. Hollywood, which had celebrated her rise, now turned its back as she stumbled. Her early career had given her everything: money, fame, critical acclaim. But it had also stolen the one thing she needed most: a safe, ordinary childhood. Instead of running on playgrounds, she was running from paparazzi. Instead of bedtime stories, she was reading scripts. Instead of being told, "You are loved," she was told, "You are marketable." The tragedy was already unfolding. Drew Barrymore, the little girl who made the world believe in magic, was being abandoned by the very industry that created her. Career breakthrough. For many actors, a career breakthrough comes after years of obscurity, after countless auditions, endless rejection, and a lucky chance that finally pays off. But for Drew Barrymore, the breakthrough was not just a role. It was a phenomenon that defined an entire generation. When E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial was released in the summer of 1982, it became more than a film. It was a cultural event. Steven Spielberg had created a story about loneliness, friendship, and innocence that resonated with millions across the globe. And at its emotional core was a little girl named Gertie, played by Drew Barrymore, who was only 7 years old. Her performance was not polished, it was pure. When she laughed at the sight of the alien, audiences laughed too. When she cried, they cried with her. There was nothing forced about it. Spielberg later said Drew had the ability to make people believe. She was not just reciting lines, she was living them. The world fell in love with her. Almost overnight, Drew Barrymore became a household name. The film earned nearly $800 million worldwide and secured its place as one of the most beloved stories in cinematic history. For Spielberg, it was another triumph. For Drew, it was the beginning of both her legend and her burden. Success opened doors at lightning speed. In 1984, she starred in Firestarter, a Stephen King adaptation about a young girl with terrifying powers hunted by adults who sought to control her. The image of Drew, her small face lit by flames she conjured, was haunting. Once again, the role mirrored her life, a child manipulated by forces beyond her control. Critics praised her intensity, amazed that someone so young could portray such rage and fear. That same year, she appeared in Irreconcilable Differences, a comedy drama about a girl who takes her self-absorbed parents to court asking for a divorce. It was a performance so poignant that Drew earned a Golden Globe nomination. But beneath the applause was irony. The role reflected her own fractured home life, her longing for stability, her yearning to be seen not as a commodity, but as a daughter. By the mid-1982nd, Drew was among the most bankable child actors in Hollywood. Her name guaranteed attention. Studios saw her as an investment, directors saw her as a rare talent. Fans adored her because she seemed so authentic, because even at such a young age, she could project emotions that felt real. But with fame came pressure. Drew was no longer treated as a little girl. She was expected to perform like an adult, to carry films on her shoulders, to deliver again and again. Instead of school, she had movie sets. Instead of friends her own age, she had co-stars and agents. Instead of boundaries, she had access to money, to parties, to substances that no child should ever encounter. Her mother, Jide, did not shield her. She brought Drew deeper into the world of Hollywood nightlife. By the time Drew was 9, she had tasted alcohol. By 10, marijuana. By 12, cocaine. The very industry that adored her talent was silently complicit in her destruction. The paradox was devastating. On screen, Drew embodied innocence and wonder. Off screen, she was losing both at an alarming rate. Tabloids began to run stories about her late nights, her drinking, her behavior. They branded her the wild child of Hollywood. For readers, it was entertainment. For Drew, it was survival, a way to quiet the ache of loneliness, to numb the absence of real parental love. And yet, her career did not immediately falter. She continued to work, appearing in Cat's Eye in 1985 and other projects that demanded she carry heavy emotional weight. Each role asked her to confront danger, abandonment, or fear, emotions she already knew intimately. Her acting was powerful because it was drawn from truth. But Hollywood was not interested in her truth. It was interested only in her performance. By the end of the decade, the same role that had given her everything threatened to trap her. She was still seen as the adorable girl from E.T., not the young woman she was becoming. Casting directors hesitated. Studios doubted whether she could transition into more mature roles. For Drew, her breakthrough had been a blessing that became a curse. She had achieved what most actors only dream of: international fame, critical acclaim, and a Golden Globe nomination before she was even 10. But she had also lost what most children take for granted: safety, privacy and the freedom to grow up slowly. Her career breakthrough was extraordinary, but it carried within it the seeds of her downfall. The very industry that made Drew Barrymore immortal was also preparing to abandon her peak years and public image. By the early 1990s, Drew Barrymore was no longer the little girl who charmed the world in E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial. She had become something more complicated, a paradox of survival and self-destruction, a fallen angel branded as Hollywood's wild child, and a young woman determined to claw her way back from ruin. The public had watched her unravel in real time. By 13, she was addicted. By 14, she was in rehab. By 15, she was legally emancipated from her mother. Most assumed her story would end there, another cautionary tale of a child star consumed by fame. But Drew was not finished. Instead of retreating, she leaned into her chaos and began to reinvent herself. At 17, Drew posed for provocative magazine covers, shedding the image of America's sweetheart. She was bold, unashamed, and deliberately shocking. Then came Poison Ivy in 1992, where she played a troubled teenager whose dangerous sexuality destroyed a family. The role was controversial, but it forced Hollywood to see her not as a child, but as a young woman. Critics were divided, yet her performance proved one thing: Drew could no longer be confined to innocence. Her public image, however, remained messy. She was still known as the rebellious daughter of Hollywood's most tragic dynasty. But she had something others did not: authenticity. In interviews, she spoke openly about her addictions, her mistakes, and her pain. She laughed at herself, cried when memories resurfaced, and never pretended to be perfect. Audiences, weary of Hollywood illusions, found her honesty refreshing. Slowly, opportunities returned. In Boys on the Side, 1995, Drew revealed vulnerability beneath her wildness, playing a young woman searching for love and belonging. The film showed a softer side, and critics began to whisper that perhaps Drew was not only surviving, but also maturing as an artist. Then came Scream in 1996. Cast in what appeared to be the leading role, Drew's character was brutally killed in the opening sequence. It was a shocking twist that redefined horror cinema. Though she appeared on screen for only a few minutes, her presence dominated the film's marketing. The choice was brilliant, and it reminded Hollywood that Drew Barrymore still had the power to capture attention and control expectation. But the true rebirth arrived in 1998 with The Wedding Singer. Opposite Adam Sandler, Drew rediscovered the warmth that had once made her beloved. But this time, it was not childish innocence. It was mature, heartfelt sincerity. Audiences fell in love with her all over again. The film was a box office hit, and Drew was no longer a fallen star. She was a romantic comedy queen. She cemented this image with Never Been Kissed in 1999, playing Josie, an awkward journalist reliving her painful teenage years. The role resonated deeply with audiences. Drew's vulnerability made Josie's transformation feel authentic, mirroring her own journey from humiliation to self-acceptance. For millions, Drew was no longer just a survivor, she was hope. Then, in the year 2000, she took control of her destiny. With her production company Flower Films, Drew revived Charlie's Angels alongside Cameron Diaz and Lucy Liu. The film grossed more than $250 million worldwide, proving she was more than an actress. She was a businesswoman, a producer, a force. Her quirky humor and fearless energy made her the heart of the trio. When the sequel arrived in 2003, it was clear Drew Barrymore was back at the top. Her public image during these peak years became a paradoxical balance. She was the rom-com darling who made audiences laugh and cry, but she was also the rebellious survivor who had danced with darkness and lived to tell the tale. Magazines called her the comeback queen. Talk shows adored her for her unfiltered honesty. She laughed loudly, cried openly, and spoke about her demons without shame. Throughout the early 2000s, Drew continued to dominate. She reunited with Adam Sandler in 50 First Dates, 2004, a film that showcased their undeniable chemistry once again. She starred in Music and Lyrics, 2007, charming audiences with her mix of humor and vulnerability. She even took risks with smaller projects, like Donnie Darko, 2001, where she also served as a producer. Each film reinforced her reputation not just as a star, but as a storyteller. And yet, even at the height of her career, shadows lingered. Drew admitted in interviews that she still wrestled with insecurity. She confessed fears of abandonment, struggles with body image, and the quiet ache of loneliness. Her laughter on camera often carried an undertone of survival, the kind that comes only after you have lived through hell. "I don't pretend my past didn't happen," she once said. "I just refuse to let it define me." And Vruli. Audiences adored her not because she was perfect, but because she was flawed and unafraid to show it. She became a symbol of resilience, of imperfection worn with pride. In a city obsessed with illusions, Drew Barrymore was painfully, beautifully real. By the mid-2000s, Drew was more than a star. She was a cultural figure, a woman who embodied survival and reinvention. She represented hope for every child star who had been broken by fame, proof that it was possible to rise again. Her peak years were not just about box office numbers, they were about redefining what it meant to live after tragedy. And yet Hollywood is never satisfied. The higher she climbed, the more pressure mounted. The romantic comedies that had resurrected her image also threatened to trap her in typecasting. The whispers began once again. Could she sustain this momentum? Could she evolve beyond rom-com queen? Or was she destined to repeat the cycle of triumph and downfall that haunted her family name? Drew Barrymore had reclaimed her place in Hollywood's spotlight. But even in triumph, the shadow of tragedy never fully disappeared. Downfall and struggles. Every Hollywood story has a fracture point, the moment when applause begins to fade and shadows creep in. For Drew Barrymore, the fracture began while she was still a child. What appeared to be the height of success was already laced with tragedy. By the age of 9, Drew was drinking alcohol. By 10, she was smoking marijuana. By 12, cocaine had entered her world. At 13, she was already addicted. At 14, she entered rehab for the first time at the Van Nuys Psychiatric Hospital. The public devoured the headlines, "America's sweetheart gone bad." But few stopped to ask how a child could have slipped so far, so quickly. The truth was harsh. Drew's playgrounds were nightclubs. Her guardians were Hollywood insiders who saw her as entertainment, not as a child. Her mother, Jaid, often took her to Studio 54 and other celebrity haunts. There, Drew was treated like a novelty. The child star sipping champagne, the adorable girl with a cigarette in her hand. Adults laughed, posed for photos, and turned away from the obvious. In Hollywood, excess was expected even when it came from someone barely out of elementary school. The industry loved to romanticize her rebellion. The tabloids called her the wild child, fascinated by the spectacle of a little girl crashing through adult vices. Drew herself once reflected that, at the time, no one thought to say, "Stop." Not the reporters, not the club owners, not even her mother. The machine of Hollywood kept turning, and she was one of its gears. By the time Drew was 14, she had lost control. Her first stint in rehab was terrifying. Stripped of freedom, surrounded by strangers, she was forced to confront the enormity of her addiction. Most teenagers fear exams or heartbreak. Drew feared withdrawal symptoms and the possibility of never acting again. At 15, she took the extraordinary step of becoming legally emancipated from her mother. In court, she declared that she no longer wanted Jaid to control her life. The judge granted her request. On paper, she had gained freedom. In reality, she had become a child alone in the world. The emancipation was survival, but survival came with loneliness. Work dried up. Casting directors whispered that she was unreliable. Studios, once desperate to hire her, turned away. She was too young to play adult roles, too scandalous to play innocent ones. The girl who had once been a golden ticket for Hollywood was now considered a liability. By 16, she was appearing in B-movies and straight-to-video projects, her name used less as a selling point and more as a curiosity. The tabloids thrived. Every relapse, every rehab stay, every stumble was plastered across covers. From darling to disaster, one headline sneered, The same audiences who once adored her now consumed her downfall as entertainment. Drew later confessed that the most painful part was not the addiction itself, but the way the world seemed to cheer her destruction. At 17, she published her memoir, Little Girl Lost. It was raw, confessional, and devastating. She wrote about drugs, suicide attempts, her fractured family, and her loneliness. Readers were horrified, fascinated, and captivated. For Drew, the book was a way to reclaim her story before others destroyed it. Yet even this act of honesty was turned into a spectacle. She became the poster child for everything that could go wrong with child stardom. Behind the public chaos was private despair. Drew attempted suicide more than once during her teenage years. She was overwhelmed by the weight of expectations, the silence of absent parents, and the betrayal of friends who sold her stories for money. Each attempt was a cry for help, but Hollywood rarely listens to cries. It listens only to profit. By the early 1990s, Drew Barrymore was considered washed up. She was barely 18, yet already spoken of in the past tense. The world believed her best years were behind her. But Drew refused to disappear. Even as she battled addiction, even as she stumbled through low-budget films, she was quietly rebuilding. She took small roles, played dangerous characters, and leaned into the image of the rebel. Hollywood had discarded her, so she embraced the title of outsider. It was risky, but it kept her alive in the industry. Still, the struggles persisted. Relationships failed. Financial troubles loomed. Loneliness haunted her. She spoke candidly about nights spent crying on the floor, about moments when she believed she would never escape the cycle of relapse. For most, these years would have been the end. For Drew, they became the crucible. The tragedy of Drew Barrymore's downfall was not only in her addiction, but in how eagerly the world consumed it. She was a child fighting demons, and yet the public demanded her pain as entertainment. Hollywood celebrated her rise, abandoned her in her fall, and watched with fascination to see if she would die young. What saved her was not Hollywood, it was her own stubborn will. Drew later admitted that she grew tired of being a headline, not a person. She began to see survival as an act of rebellion. Slowly, she fought her way back. But the scars of her struggles never disappeared. They lingered, shaping every role, every laugh, every interview. Her downfall was brutal, public, and nearly fatal. But it was also the foundation for her rebirth. Because when Drew Barrymore eventually rose again, it was not as a child star or a tabloid scandal, it was as a survivor who had lived through hell and still found a way to smile. Personal life and hidden pain. If Drew Barrymore's career was a roller coaster of rise, fall, and reinvention, then her personal life was the diary of a woman forever searching for love, safety, and belonging. On screen, she was radiant, playful, and strong. Off-screen, she was often fragile, lonely, and desperate to build the family she had never truly known. Her first marriage came when she was only 19 years old. She wed Jeremy Thomas, a Welsh bar owner nearly a decade older than her. The ceremony was impulsive, carried out on the rooftop of his Los Angeles bar. To Drew, it felt like a chance at stability, a chance to anchor herself in a relationship that might protect her from chaos. But it lasted less than 2 months. The marriage collapsed as quickly as it began, and Drew was left with another reminder that her longing for permanence could so easily end in abandonment. In the years that followed, she dated a series of musicians and actors: Eric Erlandson of Hole, actor Jamie Walters, and later Fabrizio Moretti of The Strokes. Each relationship seemed passionate, wild, and short-lived. Drew loved with intensity, as though pouring all her soul into the hope that someone might finally stay. But Hollywood love rarely lasts, and hers often ended in heartbreak. Her second marriage was to comedian Tom Green in the year 2001. For a moment, they were Hollywood's eccentric golden couple, joking publicly and making quirky appearances together. But behind the laughter were cracks. Within a year, Tom filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. Drew once again faced the collapse of a marriage she had believed might save her. The deepest wound, however, came from her third marriage. In the year 2012, Drew married Will Kopelman, an art consultant from a respected family. Unlike her earlier impulsive choices, this union seemed carefully considered. They married in a quiet ceremony at her Montecito estate. Soon after, she gave birth to 2 daughters, Olive in 2012 and Frankie in 2014. For the first time in her life, Drew seemed to have everything she had longed for: a husband, children, and a home that looked stable. Motherhood transformed her. She often said her daughters saved her life. She poured herself into being present, determined to give them the safe, nurturing childhood she had been denied. She spoke of the joy of making school lunches, of bedtime stories, of simple rituals that grounded her. For a time, the public believed Drew had finally found her happy ending. But even this chapter carried hidden pain. Beneath the surface of domestic bliss, Drew wrestled with old insecurities and the weight of her past. Her marriage to Kopelman began to falter. By the year 2016, they announced their divorce. The split was civil, respectful, but for Drew, it was devastating. She admitted in interviews that the divorce left her broken and that she cried every day for months. For a woman who had already survived abandonment as a child, the failure of her marriage reopened old wounds. Her personal life outside of marriage remained complicated. She struggled with trust, often finding herself betrayed by friends who sold stories to tabloids. She wrestled with depression and confessed to moments when she felt overwhelmed by loneliness. Even as she smiled on red carpets, Drew carried inside her the fear that she was destined to repeat her family's legacy of broken homes and fractured relationships. Her relationship with her parents remained a source of pain. Her father, John Drew Barrymore, had been absent for most of her life, appearing sporadically and leaving disappointment in his wake. He died in 2004, and Drew attended his funeral with a complicated mix of grief and resignation. With her mother, Jade, the bond was even more difficult. Drew emancipated herself at 15, but years later, she attempted reconciliation. Yet the scars ran deep. She once admitted, "It's hard to be a daughter when you've had to be your own parent." Despite the heartbreak, Drew's greatest triumph as a person was her honesty. She refused to hide her struggles. She joked about her addictions, spoke candidly about therapy, and admitted to her failures as readily as her successes. This vulnerability, though painful, became a kind of strength. Fans did not love her because she was flawless. They loved her because she was real. Still, the pain was always there. Drew once said that her greatest fear was not failure in her career, but failure as a mother. She carried the weight of her family's history like a warning, determined to break the cycle of abandonment and addiction. But the very act of carrying that burden was exhausting. In love, in family, in friendship, Drew Barrymore was always seeking what fame could never give her: permanence. And perhaps the tragedy of her personal life is this, that even when she found moments of happiness, they were often shadowed by the fear of losing them. Her story is not simply one of scandal and divorce, but of a woman who kept searching for love even after the world told her she did not deserve it. She was the girl who survived addiction, the woman who survived Hollywood, and the mother who survived heartbreak. But survival leaves scars, and Drew carried hers openly, etched into every laugh and every tear. Later years and legacy. By the late 2000s and into the 2010s, Drew Barrymore had achieved something few child stars ever manage. She not only survived, she thrived. But survival in Hollywood is never simple. Even as she built a new identity as a producer, businesswoman, and mother, she carried with her the scars of her past. Her professional life evolved in surprising directions. In the year 2009, she directed her first feature film, Whip It, a story about a rebellious girl finding empowerment through roller derby. Though not a massive commercial success, it was critically respected and, more importantly, proved that Drew could command not only the screen but also the camera. This directorial debut symbolized her determination to tell stories on her own terms, not just act in the roles others chose for her. As the years went on, Drew increasingly shifted her focus from acting to producing. Her company, Flower Films, became a creative hub that gave birth to many of her most successful projects, including Charlie's Angels, 50 First Dates, and music and lyrics. She also ventured into business, launching Flower Beauty, a cosmetics line built on her philosophy of accessible beauty. For a girl once consumed by Hollywood excess, building a brand around authenticity was a kind of poetic justice. Yet the most visible reinvention of Drew Barrymore in her later years came on television. In the year 2020, she launched The Drew Barrymore Show. It premiered during the global pandemic, a time when audiences craved comfort, honesty, and warmth. Drew delivered exactly that. Her talk show was quirky, messy, heartfelt, an extension of herself. Guests described the experience less as an interview and more as a conversation with an old friend. But beneath the laughter, Drew's vulnerability often surfaced. She cried openly on camera, admitted to her fears, and spoke about her struggles with depression and loneliness. For some critics, this was unprofessional. For her fans, it was deeply human. In a media landscape full of polished illusions, Drew offered raw truth. She did not play the role of the perfect host. She was simply Drew, and that was enough. Her legacy as a mother became equally important. Olive and Frankie remained at the center of her life. She often described motherhood as her second chance, the opportunity to give her children the stability she had been denied. She embraced ordinary routines, packing lunches, attending school events, and reading bedtime stories. To Drew, these mundane moments were more precious than red carpets or premieres. They were proof that she had broken the Barrymore curse, at least in part. Still, shadows lingered. She admitted to struggling after her divorce from Will Kopelman in 2016. She described the period as one of the darkest of her life, confessing that she cried every day for nearly a year. Her honesty about therapy, about falling apart and piecing herself back together, resonated deeply with audiences who had followed her journey for decades. Her legacy was no longer measured in awards or box office numbers. It was measured in resilience. Drew Barrymore had become a cultural symbol, not for perfection but for persistence. She represented the possibility of survival in an industry that devours its young. She was proof that scars could become stories, that pain could transform into connection. Younger generations discovered her films on streaming platforms, E.T., The Wedding Singer, and Never Been Kissed. For them, Drew was both nostalgia and revelation. The child who once embodied innocence, the woman who embodied survival. Critics often debated her place in Hollywood history. She was not the most awarded actress, nor the most consistent box office draw, but her influence was undeniable. She redefined the romantic comedy for a generation. She proved that child stars could rise again, and she showed that authenticity, flawed, unpolished, real, could be more powerful than any illusion. In the end, Drew Barrymore's legacy is not a single film or a single moment. It is the entire arc of her life. From the little girl who touched an alien's hand on screen, to the teenager lost in addiction, to the mother and talk show host still laughing and crying in front of millions, she has lived every extreme of fame. Her story is both tragedy and triumph. It is the story of a woman who gave the world magic at 7 years old, and who, decades later, is still standing, not untouched, not unbroken, but undeniably alive. Hollywood is built on illusions, on red carpets that disguise broken paths, on applause that conceals silence, on stardom that hides loneliness. Few stars have lived through every illusion as completely as Drew Barrymore. She was the child who made the world believe in magic, the teenager who nearly lost her life to addiction, the woman who stumbled through heartbreak and failure, and the survivor who rebuilt herself time and again. Her story is not one of seamless triumph. It is one of collapse and resurrection, of scars worn openly, of resilience forged in fire. The tragedy of Drew Barrymore is not only what she endured: substance abuse at 9, rehab at 14, emancipation at 15, divorces, betrayals, and heartbreaks, but how much of it was consumed as entertainment. Her pain was turned into headlines, her struggles mocked, her survival treated as spectacle. She was never allowed to simply be a girl. She had to be a symbol, and yet, she remained. At 50, Drew Barrymore is not just a memory of the child who laughed in E.T. She is a woman who redefined survival, who built businesses, raised daughters, and shared her truth on television screens. She is a reminder that even when Hollywood tries to destroy you, it cannot erase your humanity. But questions linger, unanswered, and perhaps unanswerable. Did Hollywood betray her by stealing her childhood, or did it shape her into someone stronger than she ever imagined? Was her resilience a victory, or simply the cost of surviving? Did Drew Barrymore find peace, or has she learned only how to carry pain more gracefully? Perhaps her legacy is not in answers, but in contradictions. She is both tragic and triumphant, broken and unbreakable, abandoned and beloved. She is a reminder that survival in Hollywood is never simple. It is messy, costly, and endlessly human. And so we leave her story not with a perfect ending, but with a reflection. Drew Barrymore is not just a Hollywood star. She is a survivor who turned her scars into strength. And in her survival, she gave the world something greater than perfection. She gave it truth. What memory of Drew Barrymore stays with you? Is it the little girl whose laughter lit up the screen in E.T., the rom-com queen of The Wedding Singer and Never Been Kissed? Or the woman who still stands, honest and vulnerable, after everything she endured? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you believe, as we do, that behind the marquee lie stories of pain, resilience, and survival, do not forget to like, subscribe, and join us again for more journeys into the tragedies and hidden truths of Hollywood's brightest and most broken stars.